This is AHA Business Radio, creating AHA moments for business, by business, and about business, providing opportunities to discover information to help you run your business and guide your decision making. The more you know, the better decisions you make. AHA Business Radio is produced by Allan Hirsh Advisors. For more information, log on to ahabusinessradio.com. To join in tonight's conversation, call 410-481-1300. Now, here's your host for AHA Business Radio, Allan Hirsh.
Good evening. Welcome to tonight's show. I have several guests in the studio and one on the call-in line this evening. We're going to be talking about cybersecurity. I have with us in the studio is Stacey Smith, the Executive Director of the Cybersecurity Association of Maryland. Melissa McCoy, who's on the phone, is the Chief Technology Officer, I believe, at Kalzen Approach, which is a commercial venture in the area. I have Valerie Corekin. Is that correct? Corekin. I apologize. Who's Vice President, Senior Risk Advisor and Risk Solutions Group at PSA Insurance and Financial. I can't read today. I apologize. And Howard Feldman, partner of Whiteford, Taylor and Preston, a law firm in town. Good start, Allan. Anyway, welcome all of you to the show. We're going to talk about cybersecurity, its importance to business owners. But before we do that, like I always do, I'd like to ask Stacey, first of all, what most motivates you to get up in the morning and go to work?
Thanks, Allan. I would say it's with our organization, we're a newly formed organization, so it's a challenge of doing something new for the first time every day, and also helping the cybersecurity companies that are involved with our organization. They are looking to me to help them make business connections and generate sales, grow jobs in Maryland, and just the challenge of all of that. It motivates me to come to work.
So, Melissa, you're on the line. What motivates you to get up in the morning and go to work?
What motivates me is helping our customers find the right cybersecurity solutions for them, whether they're small, medium, or large businesses. You know, I try to help them realize that they might have the tools that they have themselves, or they might need some help picking them out, and that's what gets me up.
Well, thank you. And Valerie?
What gets me up is being able to help people identify what their risk transfer issues are and provide them with good advice and good products in the insurance and specifically in the insurance industry.
Okay, and Howard?
Well, the real joy in what I do is every day presents a new and interesting challenge, and most of them you don't even foresee when the day starts because they come, across your desk as the day progresses, and it's just, wonderful to work with our clients and help them help their own businesses.
So, cybersecurity is something, 25 years ago, nobody even thought about it because the internet's was only 25 years old last month. So, it's really transformed. The cyber space has been transformed business over the last 25 years. So, what are some of the challenges, first of all, about cybersecurity that businesses need to understand in protecting some of that risk? So anybody, Melissa, that's what you do, help customers?
I just like to point out that cybersecurity affects everybody, that small businesses may think that they're small targets, that nobody's going to be interested in them, but really everyone needs to understand that hackers and other criminals are looking for opportunities based on the vulnerabilities that they find. They'll scan websites, they'll for vulnerabilities, then try to get in. They'll send spam emails with infected attachments or links back to infected web servers. They'll populate malware on popular sites if they can break in, and people will be browsing, and if they have the right, in other words, the wrong vulnerabilities on their PCs and laptops and tablets, they'll download this malware without even being aware of it. So I just wanted to stress that everybody is at risk here, no matter who you are, and it's really good to have a cybersecurity plan.
So talking about a plan, and please jump in, all of you or any of you at any time. So what do you mean by a cybersecurity plan?
What I mean is taking a look at your own environment. That is, what's important to you, the data the services that you do, no matter what you do. And this can be for, just your payroll, your bank accounts, your the data that you keep for your customers, and what that would cost to lose access to it. For example, I think most people out there have read the news reports on ransomware, and that is people malware encrypting your data, and then you have to pay a ransom to get the encryption key to de-encrypt it. If you don't have backups, if you haven't if you haven't planned, and this can be just something as simple as I'm going to use a certain backup provider. I'm going to make my own backups. I'm going to I'm going to keep my systems patched. I'm going to run antivirus. A cybersecurity plan doesn't have to be an elaborate thing. It can be something very simple. But first of all, you have to make an assessment of your own environment and what would happen if you were suddenly without.
So if something does happen, what do you do? I mean, in thinking about the risk, and I know, Valerie, you're in the insurance business, so businesses looking at this, how do you evaluate sometimes the risk of an encroachment, a security breach?
Well, I want to step back here and say that most businesses that I look at today, unless they're enlightened, probably don't have coverage for a cyber breach. If their business is brought down because their computers are frozen and they can't access the information for 2 weeks, that type of loss is probably not going to be covered under their standard business owner's policy, because it's not a covered peril under many policies. If there's a privacy breach, coverage for privacy breaches is not necessarily under a standard general liability policy, where it might have been a few years ago. The Insurance Industry Association has taken steps over the last few years to really redirect the coverage that used to be under the CGL to cyber coverage.
CGL meaning?
I'm sorry, CGL meaning Commercial General Liability.
Okay, thank you.
I apologize for the insurance acronyms.
That's okay. I'll ask the questions if not sure I know it either, and maybe the audience doesn't know it. So part of that process is a plan, understanding where you need to be protected, and then find a way to protect it in case it happens.
Correct. And it really starts with cybersecurity first, because insurance is what happens after the barn burns down. Insurance happens. If you can stop the barn from burning down, to use an analogy that I grew up with, you're less likely to have a severe loss, and you're more likely to be able to recover from that loss more simply. For instance, I saw a recent statement from the Small Business Association, or the Small Business Administration, that said something in the neighborhood of 60% of small businesses that have experienced a cyber breach are out of business in the next year. That's a fairly significant number.
And I've heard a higher percentage than 60%. So yes, that's why I think it's important to doing a show like this, to make sure that business people, whether you're the owner or whether you're in management or an employee, your job is at risk if there's a security breach.
Allan, I'd like to echo an important point that Melissa made, and that is a lot of small businesses don't really give cybersecurity any consideration, or way too little consideration. And if your listeners walk away with anything, it's they should understand, no matter how small of a business they are, they too can be a target. And a good example of that is everybody reads every day in the paper about the large newsworthy breaches, like your Targets, your Sonys, your Home Depots. But what people may not realize, for example, is the Target breach was through a comparatively small business, an outside contractor. I think it was an HVAC contractor.
Yes, I heard that story as well.
Probably thought, like most small businesses, that it's not going to be me. And that is the first mistake you can make when it comes to cybersecurity. So that's an important takeaway. And then everything flows from that once you realize once the light bulb goes on, that it can be you.
Well, it's like if you have a general liability for the products you make, you're not planning to make a product that's going to be defective and cause someone damage or create a problem with a customer, but you have insurance to protect it. It's tradition, but that's been going on for hundreds of years. What hasn't has been the damages being created by cybersecurity. So many business owners, if I were doing it, I have this small business now where I coach, but if I were doing a business when I had a business 25 years ago, I never thought of it. It didn't. And as a seasoned professional, the idea really doesn't, we don't think of it. And that's why it's important to talk about it. And before we continue the conversation, we have to go to the first commercial break. And as we do, we have the traffic update. And when I come back, I'll continue the discussion with Stacey Smith, Melissa McCoy, Valerie Corekin, and Howard Feldman. And later in the show, I will have the AHA Business Trivia Contest. I'm Allan Hirsh of Allan Hirsh Advisors, and this is AHA Business Radio on CBS Sports Radio, 1300 AM. Great athletes have coaches. So should CEOs and business owners. Hi, this is Allan Hirsh of Allan Hirsh Advisors. Owning a business takes drive, desire, and a certain amount of luck. Well, I can't help you with the luck. I can help you make better decisions, giving you a competitive edge. If you own a business, I invite you to contact us. Our goal is to help you align your company vision and your personal lives so you'll make and execute better decisions. At Allan Hirsh Advisors, we create those aha moments. Log on to AllanHirschAdvisors.com for more information.
Now back to AHA Business Radio, creating aha moments for business, by business, and about business. Once again, here's your host, Allan Hirsh.
Well, welcome back to the show. In the studio with me is Stacey Smith of the Cybersecurity Association of Maryland. Melissa McCoy is on the line. Valerie Corekin is in the studio, and she does risk management and insurance on cybersecurity. And Howard Feldman, an attorney with Whiteford, Taylor, and Preston, and we're talking about cybersecurity. So before we left, we were talking about some of the kinds of breaches that can happen. But I think it's also important to understand the kind of information that needs to be protected. There are laws like HIPAA. There are, you mentioned, Howard, at the break, there's a Maryland law about security and cybersecurity breaches. So we might not even think out there as business people, as business owners, what is it we actually have to protect? So what is it we have to protect?
Well, it depends what kind of personal information you have, because unfortunately, Congress from a federal level and state legislatures have legislated very differently in this area. So Congress has taken the approach where they're going to legislate sort of sector by sector. So you have laws that relate to health information, HIPAA, which is what you mentioned. You have laws that relate to financial information, which is Gramm-Leach-Bliley. You have laws related to personal information from children 13 or under, which is COPA, Children's Online Privacy Protection Act, and so on and so forth. But you also have laws from almost every state which legislates various aspects of personal information. So here in Maryland, we have the Maryland Personal Information Protection Act, which requires that businesses that have personally identifiable information, which is usually thought of as a name and something else that identifies a person. It could be a driver's license number, a social security number, things
a
such
telephone number, an address.
Not information. If you have a breach of a name and a telephone number, that wouldn't be considered a data breach because that's usually publicly available information anyway.
Credit card number and credit card information.
Exactly.
But if you're a company that is working across state borders, that generalization might not hold true.
Valerie's right.
Because in California, the combination of a name and a mailing and a street address, which is actually part of the phone directory, can be considered a breach.
And
depending upon, because every state legislates slightly differently. So if you're doing interstate, it's different than your intrastate, just in the state of Maryland.
In some states, you might, for example, have biometric information be considered as personally identifiable.
What's biometric information?
Information about if you have information about access that a fingerprint, for example,
Okay.
would be biometric information. That if you might have electronic files of people's fingerprints if you need fingerprints to access a building.
Okay.
For example.
Or if you've done a criminology check or a background check on an individual, or for employment screening. So those are the kinds of things you're talking about as well?
As well as, for example, in some states, it could be a username and password from a website would be considered personally identifiable information. And if you have a data breach, then you have to comply with 48 sets of different laws from states that requires that you notify.
Well, it would be 49
ways.
unless there's one state that doesn't have a law.
There's one or two states that don't. Except
Okay.
for Texas, which has taken it upon itself to say, if you have a data breach involving Texas residents' information, then you have to notify. And if the data breach includes residents of those states that don't have data breach notification laws, then you also have to notify those other persons. So Texas has taken it upon itself to protect residents of the states that have not legislated in this area.
So it sounds like it's very complicated, but it's all kind of, I mean, you were saying before the show, Valerie, that in your position at PSA, that you not only you have to worry about insuring, but you're also part of the risk management for the company. The kinds of information that you have to make sure you're protecting is information that is as broad as you can possibly imagine for your protection.
It's staggering. Any type of a service business that's working with individual data, if we're putting together health insurance, think about what we need to put the health insurance together. We need to have the name, the date of birth, and all of the personal information, not only of the employee, but also the employee's dependents. That's, we have to place a very high value on privacy, and we have to make certain that we treat it correctly. But again, every organization is subject to the potential of a breach. What happens when the breach happens is a big deal. It's not just a typical insurance claim. In fact, in our world, we want people that are experiencing a breach to get in contact with an attorney, because that way, as they do work, I think that some of the work that is done is protected under client-attorney privilege. And Howard and Melissa, that would probably be a good segue for you guys.
So before you do that, I just want to remind the listeners that we're talking about cybersecurity. If you have any questions for the guests or myself, please give us a call at 410-481-1300. So, Melissa, you're out there on the phone, but how do you find systems to protect all this information? What kind of systems are there?
Well, there's a lot of things are not. I mean, a lot of things are not new to your listeners. They're the same. They're the same. They're the same issues that are brought up again and again. Keep your systems up to date, and by that I mean, your laptops, your PCs, your tablets, even your smartphones. If your smartphones are used to access websites and systems that you depend upon, you need to protect those as well. Put passwords on everything. Make the passwords a little bit more complex than password one. Change default passwords when you get new equipment. So those are things that sound kind of boring, but they're very important. To get more specific about security solutions, when we talk about the Internet opening up a lot of risks and vulnerabilities that weren't there 25 years ago, there's also a lot of new options that the businesses can use, particularly small businesses that don't have their own IT staff. And there you can store your data on a secure cloud provider. You can do your backups if you find a secure backup provider.
So how do you know the cloud backup provider is secure? I heard, and I don't mean to put a monkey wrench in this, but I heard a story where someone had all its data secured on the out on the cloud, and lo and behold, the federal government, Justice Department, issued a subpoena for all the information on the server because one of the people storing information had to be a drug dealer. It shut down the system for 3 weeks and no one else could get to their data.
Well, that wouldn't be a security breach, though. You can't predict if the government's going to.
Yeah, but that's still, I understand it's not a security breach, but it is thinking about when you're using cyberspace to protect yourself, you have to think about the next level. Are there two servers you're using? Does the cybersecurity or the backup company actually duplicate it, save it in two places, so that if there is a breach in their breach in one, this was happened to be a government breach, but what if someone breached one of their servers? Do they, in fact, back it up another to protect the information that is yours?
Well, you raise a good point, because one thing a business owner should do if they're going to make the decision to store data on the cloud is read the terms and conditions of that contract. If they're using Amazon services or Google or another cloud service provider, read what happens in the event of a data breach. Read the terms and conditions of the agreement so that you know what happens. What is their responsiveness going to be if their systems go down? And what will they guarantee? And will they indemnify you for losses? Those sorts of things.
Well, coming back to the insurance aspect, if this type of risk can be covered under contingent business income, it's a cyber product that can be added to a standalone cyber policy. And it has to be, though, a specific cyber-related contingent business income, because the contingent business income under a standard policy wouldn't respond because it's not the loss, because in this situation is not a tangible loss, it's an electronic loss. But that brings up some of the problems and the confusions with the insurance policies. They're all different. They all use different phrases. They all use different terms. One carrier refers to something as a glitch. Another refers to something as a wrongful act. So it really takes some time to look at what the insurance products are and understanding what your needs are before just buying the least expensive cyber liability policy.
Yeah, Howard, you were...
Well, Valerie's right. Valerie and our firm have worked closely over the years because the cyber policies are some of the most reading an insurance policy.
I was going to say reading these form contracts, same thing from the cloud providers, but
it's awful. But in terms of reading an insurance policies, cyber insurance policies, you have to really carefully read, because compared to auto insurance or the general liability policies, they're comparatively new to the market, and the carriers are still figuring them out. Quite honestly,
I understand that.
Involved. And so
let's talk about that when we come back from the commercial break, and we'll continue that discussion with Stacey Smith, Melissa McCoy, Valerie Corekin, and Howard Feldman. I'm Allan Hirsh, and this is AHA Business Radio on CBS Radio, 1300 AM.
Now back to AHA Business Radio, creating aha moments for business, by business, and about business. Once again, here's your host, Allan Hirsh.
Welcome back to the show. We're talking about cybersecurity, and with me in the studio is Stacey Smith, the Executive Director of the Cybersecurity Association of Maryland. Valerie Corekin, who's Vice President, Risk Advisor and Risk Solutions Group at the PSA Insurance and Financial Services. Howard Feldman, who's a lawyer partner at Whiteford, Taylor & Preston. And on the phone is Melissa McCoy, a Chief Technology Officer of Kalzen Approach. And as I said, we're talking about cybersecurity and all the issues around it. So if you have out there in the audience have any questions or comments, please give us a call at 410-481-1300. Before we left, we were talking about some insurance and what it means. And one of the questions I wanted to ask next is, how do you, with all this stuff in cybersecurity going on, and I know there's some statutory damages if you have a breach and you screw up, but how much and how do you value the effects, one, on your business, the effects whether it outside the business? And Howard, you're a lawyer. Valerie, you're in the insurance. how do you value the potential damages that can occur from a cybersecurity breach? Someone pick it up, please. Melissa, if you want to, please do.
Well, that's a hard question to answer, because how do you assess what your potential losses are? And that's part of the risk assessment, I think, that Melissa spoke of earlier. So the starting point is, what kind of data do I have? If you have medical information, if you're in the healthcare field, that kind of data, and if it's breached, is going to result in higher losses than if you have other kinds of data. An organization called the Ponemon Institute every year, and it's available online, does a yearly report about what the cost of a data breach is. And they look at many industry sectors: finance, healthcare, manufacturing, so on and so forth, and statistically determine what the cost of a data breach is by industry, looking at what the costs are in responding to a data breach. What are the legal costs? What are the costs of complying with data breach notification laws? All those kinds of things. In the healthcare field, it's the highest cost. I don't have the report in front of me, but I would venture to guess it's $300-400 per record breached. So if you multiply that times 1,000, if you have information of 1,000 patients, do the math. If you have information on 10,000 patients, again, do the math. And that can be a good starting.
And you also have to remember, it's not just the financial damages, but also the reputational risk.
Absolutely. The publicity, which doesn't happen a lot of the small businesses much as it does the big mega companies around the country. But yeah, that's its reputation. It's a public relations effect that can always happen on a business.
No question.
Well, I would jump in to say that when you're assessing this, you have to look at the different types or different elements of the risk. You've got liability to members of the public or to your employees if their information is breached. You have the potential of fines and penalties. If you've got merchant service agreements for credit card processing, every one of those merchant service agreements that I've seen passes back any of the costs for the merchant service agreements back to the source of the breach. So you're looking at having fines and penalties, not only from regulatory, but also you might have contractual penalties. And then I've mentioned business interruption a couple of times. That's a direct damage loss. What happens when your business is suspended and you can't operate for a couple of days? You might be able to get by with a couple of days, but if you can't operate for weeks on end, that's going to be a substantial loss. So these are all pieces that need to go into the evaluation.
Okay, just want to remind everybody that I'm Allan Hirsh, and I'm talking to Stacey Smith, Melissa McCoy, Valerie Corekin, and Howard Feldman. We're talking about cybersecurity. If you have any questions or comments, please give us a call at 410-481-1300. So it's, we're sitting here. It's so difficult, I guess, as you said, Howard, started to calculate it. But someone has to do a calculation somewhere, because if you're going to insure it for risk, and then there's something I've always learned in business, a return on investment or risk reward, which is in a smaller business to get the full coverage and do it. Is it really worth the investment sometimes to do the prevention and the insurance to protect the risk? And how do you do that kind of a evaluation?
Well, I think the first thing you do is you talk to a good insurance broker, somebody like Valerie, because that's a good insurance broker will help guide, just like they'll help you pick the right auto insurance policy for your business. They're going to help you pick the right cyber policy so that you don't over-insure. But you look at you look at data such as, what are the average costs of a data breach for my kind of business? How much data do I have? What are the other potential liabilities? Valerie mentioned credit card processing. For small businesses, let me step back. If you process credit cards, you are likely agreeing by contract, you may not realize it or not, but when you agree to process credit cards, you're going to become subject to something called the Payment Card Industry Data Security Standards, which are extremely onerous.
There's no federal law, is there, on
This is just by contract.
Okay.
If you're processing credit cards, you probably have to comply with these standards by the agreement with the bank that you've just signed.
And if you're not using a bank but a merchant service organization?
Well, so what we tell a lot of our clients is to do it through PayPal or something like that. Sometimes it's worth the fee that they'll take so that you don't have to comply and bear the cost of complying with the very onerous requirements of the Payment Card Industry Data Security Standards.
Okay.
So that's a step a business can take that's unrelated to insurance. We don't want to risk and have to deal with the hassle of processing credit cards. Let's push that off to an
subcontract it to an outside vendor.
Exactly.
Which a lot of small business should do in a lot of areas. That's one of the things I work with CEOs to subcontract or farm out or hire. One of the biggest problems most of them have is learning how to delegate. They want to do everything themselves, don't know how to delegate. One more, you want to say something, Valerie?
I do, but I would say generally that you can't subcontract away your breach costs. I talk to, when I'm working with contractors, there's a lot of risk transfer in contracts, especially if you've got service contracts for professional services, and you can transfer general liability to your subcontractor. But right now, the risk transfer for cyber isn't as effective because so few organizations have cyber or network security coverage. So that becomes a problem because if you're trying to rely on risk transfer, you need to have a funding mechanism for when things go wrong.
So Melissa, your list. This is not. I don't know if this is your area, but the helping businesses understand the risk and planning for it. So what are some of the things you do to work with your clients to make sure from an internal point of view they're protecting and making sure they're, I guess the right word is really protecting their information from cyber thieves?
Well, the first thing we do, and this is something we've all been talking about, is making sure people understand the value of what they have. And so far we've been talking about people losing data or losing access to it or having it stolen or exposed. But there's also the issue that people need, small businesses, all businesses need to think about their commercial bank accounts because they do not have the same protection that a consumer bank account does. In other words, a bank or credit union doesn't have to make you whole if money is wired out of your commercial account. And there's been enough publicity about companies that have had money stolen from their accounts. And by stolen, I mean there's viruses and malware out there that are designed explicitly to capture keystrokes for bank, PayPal, and anything that has to do with money, and capturing that login information, sending it off, and someone actually using it, one of the hackers or criminals actually using it to log into the accounts and transfer money out.
Yeah, I actually heard a story where they actually hacked into their email account, sent an email through their account to their financial person in the office to wire and look legitimate to wire $400,000 to a bank account. Fortunately, the business owner had called to talk to the financial person in the process. I'm in the process of wiring the money you requested. He said, "What money?" But it's all kinds of those kinds of breaches, and we'll continue our conversation when we come back from the next commercial break. And when we do, we'll also have the AHA Business Trivia Contest, and I'll continue the discussion on cybersecurity. I'm Allan Hirsh of Allan Hirsh Advisors. This is AHA Business Radio on CBS Sports Radio 1300 AM.
Now, Now back to AHA Business Radio, creating aha moments for business, by business, and about business. And now it's time for tonight's AHA Trivia Question, where you can win great prizes from the AHA Business Radio Show. Call 410-481-1300 if you know the answer. And now with tonight's AHA Trivia Question, here's your host, Allan Hirsh.
Since we're talking about cybersecurity and security breaches, tonight's trivia question is: when was the first federal Credit Card Security Act passed by Congress? If you've been listening to the show, you might have heard something about that, so please give us a call at 410-481-1300, and the first caller with the correct answer will receive a gift certificate to the 1010 American Bistro, a member of the Bagby Restaurant Group. Just want to remind everybody, I'm in the studio with Stacey Smith, the Executive Director of the Cybersecurity Association of Maryland, Melissa McCoy, the Chief Technology Officer at Kalzen Approach, Valerie Corekin, who's Vice President of Risk Advisor and Risk Solutions at PSA Insurance and Financial Services, and Howard Feldman, a law partner at Whiteford, Taylor & Preston. So before we left, we talked about a incident that I had heard about a breach through email. And Howard, you said something at the break, and I think this is about what we need to do also to think about in cybersecurity. And you mentioned that so many of these breaches start because something happens inside a business, not necessarily outside a business. So what were you were trying to say?
Well, what you described has become a common practice. It's called spoofing. And it's where an email is sent that looks like it was sent for example, within an organization, and a lot of people fall for those kinds of things. Send a wire to, or can you send me a list of our employees and all of their information, including social security numbers? That's not unusual as well. Those kinds of emails, and Melissa touched on earlier, and don't get me wrong, it's important. All of the technology solutions that can be implemented to protect data, but even with the best technology issues, the weakest link in any business is always the human element. And you're not providing adequate security measures if you're not addressing, as part of your overall security plan, the human element. And that means training your employees. So in your example, in your story, for example, a business would train employees that if you get something that doesn't look right, pick up the phone, ask, or wires over a certain dollar amount must be verified with an oral instruction, those sorts of things. Also as part of the human element. It's no less a data breach, for example, if someone leaves a laptop in the back seat of their car and their car gets broken into and the laptop with personal information on it gets stolen. That's as much as a data breach as if someone hacks into your system and takes that same information, and the burdens of complying with all of the laws and the potential liabilities are equal. The
same thing's true if you lose your cell phone.
That's right.
And you have business data on your cell phone.
Absolutely.
And there's protections that can be made for that by putting certain kinds of software on cell phones so that you can wipe data. But if your employee doesn't report the phone lost because they think that they're going to be subjected to some penalty and they delay, or they think they're going to find it, then the best technology on that phone that the business has to wipe data from it is no good.
So what you're talking about is really employee training. It's also a receptionist could receive an email that happens to have malware. So they have to be trained on what to look for and what not to open, or what to question. Am I aware of that? Is that really some of the kinds of things you do? So you really have to train every single employee you have.
And repeatedly.
It's not a one and done.
It's not a one and done. There are companies that do what's called penetration testing, and they'll go into a business. They'll be hired to try and break into a business. And one of the common things, for example, that might be done is very low tech. And we actually had it done at my firm. They leave thumb drives scattered around the office with our firm's logo on it, and to see if people will pick them up and put them into a computer. And if you do that and you pick up the wrong one in a business or even at home, on that thumb drive could be malware. And someone might have left one on purpose at a Starbucks, and you pick it up, I have a nice new thumb drive. Well, that was left there intentionally for somebody to pick up, to inject into it wherever they're going to put that thumb drive.
So, Melissa, when you work with your clients, what are some of the training tools you use to help them work with their employees?
Well, the tools can be as simple as what we've all been talking about is empowering your employees to question things and think for themselves. There are various online security training classes that you can buy, subscribe to. The best practice, as Howard mentioned, is training your people annually. What a lot of the more advanced companies will do that have a security program in place is they'll do quarterly updates, or even have an internal website that publishes reminders about hey, this is going on. Ransomware is an issue right now out in the wide world. But focusing on the non-technical ways to get in, as has been mentioned, is just as important as focusing on the network and the server and the website issues that everybody seems to talk about.
Well, and that's why I thought it was important, the guests here thought it was important that we talk about it, because you can do all the prevention you want from external enclosure, but if someone within your business does something they really shouldn't have done, not intentionally, don't get me wrong, this is an accidental breach of their responsibilities, but it's done with no malware intended, but strictly because they think they're doing their job, and they make a mistake that can cost their business a lot of money.
Absolutely.
And security issues and so forth. So it's very important to understand that it all starts with people. It all starts with people. Even the people that are sending the malware, it's people. No matter what we're doing, it's about the people. It's creating the programs, dealing with the individuals you trust to do your security for your business, insurance agents you trust, lawyers you trust, and an association that in this day and age is important to help the state, help the industry, make sure we're all aware of what's going on. So we're getting close to the end of the show. So Stacey, tell us, because we haven't talked to it, a little bit about what your association does in about a minute.
Sure. So our organization is dedicated to the cybersecurity industry and connecting our cybersecurity companies located here in the state with businesses in Maryland and beyond that need cybersecurity products and services. So a lot of what we've talked about tonight, the companies that do the penetration testing, companies that do the assessments, companies that would be able to do training for small, medium, and large-sized businesses. We've got hundreds of them listed in an online directory at mdcyber.com, and it's MD for Maryland, that the business community can go to the directory and search by keywords or any of the needs that they might have and identify companies right here within the state that can help them.
That's great. I'll ask you in a minute, besides the website. Just want to, we had a trivia question, which was, when was the first Federal Credit Card Security Act passed by Congress? And the answer, there's never been one. Sorry, there was no caller, but if someone had called and said, I couldn't find it, there's never one, they would have been correct and would have won the gift certificate. So I want to thank all of you for being here. So, Stacey, how can they reach you if they have questions about the Cybersecurity Association? Sure.
My email is Stacey, Stacey, at mdcyber.com.
And Melissa, how can they reach you and your company for help for their cybersecurity issues?
I think the best way to reach me, and the simplest, would be to to send an email to info, at kaizenapproach.com.
And that's Kalzen?
It's KAI, actually.
Oh, KAI. Okay, sorry, I had the misspelling, but I'm glad you make sure, because if I got it wrong, they're going to get it wrong. So thank you. And Valerie, how can the listeners reach you?
The easiest way to reach us is actually to go to our website, which is psainsurance.com. And there's a link there that would take them directly to me and to the other cyber insurance specialists at our firm.
And Howard, how can I reach you?
The best way to reach me would be through email, and that's H and then my last name Feldman, F as in Frank, ELDMAN at WTPlaw.com, or our website, which is www.wtplaw.com.
Well, I want to thank you all for being here. I've enjoyed it. I've learned something tonight. I also want to thank my producer, Nathan. And I want to thank my new videographer who's videotaping the show tonight, Larry Wilner of LW BizFlix. Please join me next Tuesday at 6 p.m. when I will have a CEO Spotlight show, and my guest will be Bill Cole of Cole Roofing, Tom Loveland from Mind Over Matter, Bonnie Hennison from Hennison Communications, and Michael Raphael from Direct Dimensions. I'm Allan Hirsh of Allan Hirsh Advisors, your host. To reach me, you can call 443-977-4500 or visit my website, which is allanhirshadvisors.com. You can follow me on Twitter and Facebook at AHA Biz Radio. This has been AHA Business Radio on CBS Sports Radio 1300 AM.